This is an update on my heart failure situation after a day of full hospital tests. As you recall from the last video, the suspicion was that the heart valve had a stenosis. In other words, it was failing to open all the way, even though it was only 2 years old, and that's what was causing my extreme shortness of breath. So a couple weeks ago, I spent a full day at the hospital for testing from 7:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night. The basic test plan was to start with a TEE in the morning, and then a CT scan at some point, and eventually wrap up the day with the heart catheterization. And the purpose of all these tests was to get more images on the heart and the valve and all of their functions to get a better idea of what's going on. All three of these tests are described in much more detail in the video I just posted a couple weeks ago on hospital heart tests. So if you want more details on any or all of the tests, you can look over there. I started with the TEE, and for that, they do knock you out at the beginning. And this time getting it, I actually did start coming to some level of consciousness before the test was over. And even though I was still groggy after the procedure, the doctor that was conducting the test showed me an image on the screen. What I saw on the screen looked something like this. It was a head-on view of the suspicious heart valve, and all you saw was blackout screen, except there was this little arc down here and a little arc over here, which indicated that there was flow happening there. And because there's flow, that means that there is a leak. That means in these 2 points, there is blood going back and forth even though the valve is closed. Now, from a structure standpoint, I know that a valve has the tissue part in the middle, tissue valve. There's the mechanical ring around the edge, and then there's the actual native heart tissue that it's all attached to. So this part here is the actual implanted device. And so my first question to the doctor was, is this leak happening at the joint between the tissue valve and the mechanical ring, or is it happening between the mechanical ring and the heart tissue? And what she said is it's happening out here between the ring and the tissue. So that means if we make this complete now, again, you have the tissue valve, you have the mechanical ring, and then you have the heart tissue out here. And the break or leak is happening between the mechanical ring where it was attached by sutures to the original heart tissue. For anyone that's familiar with engine design, you could think of it like this being the valve, this being the valve seat, and this being the head. So it's not that you have a leak between the valve and the valve seat, the whole valve seat is coming loose from the head. Now remember, the first artificial heart valve that I had installed was when I was 34, and that lasted for 13 years. This heart valve here has only lasted 2 years and already has these 2 major leaks. So here's kind of what happens in this process. Your heart tissue is different than skeletal muscle tissue or skin, but they all have the same properties as the tissue around them when you start life. They're all the same consistency, same strength, same elasticity. So as the tissue changes, moves, whatever, they all kind of move and stretch together and everything, and they're able to heal themselves. If you think about your skin, when you get a cut on your skin, it develops a scar. If you've ever had anything major, you'll see a scar. That scar is different than the other tissue. It's harder, more brittle, not as stretchy, and when that skin fails, it's often at the joint between the scar and the healthy tissue around it. If you're familiar with welding, same kind of thing, right? You have a weld, you weld it, but you have this heat affected zone around it, and a lot of times the weld holds, but it might break between the heat affected zone and the original material. Well, in the same way with the heart, when they put in the first valve, they were cutting fresh tissue around the old valve. So there was an original native valve, they cut that out, there's this nice fresh tissue around it, and they used sutures to sew that new valve in place. Fast forward 13 years to putting this one in, they have to now cut the sutures and remove this. Well, now over time, because this was cut on, this area here is kind of scarred tissue now. And so even though they put in a bigger ring, bigger valve the second time to try to, overcompensate or compensate for getting that scarring and try to avoid it, you can only go so far. So what happens is this new valve now is being sutured in the same way as the other one, except now it's being sutured into potentially scarred area. And that scarred area here and here is what's giving away. So these sutures and that tissue are failing, which means now you're ending up with this gap between the mechanical ring and the native heart tissue. One of the things they were checking for, and this was a question I asked about later, is, okay, I've got this valve in here, if this is like a view upward, and you have the native heart tissue and it's sewn in here on the edges, but at some point, if these sutures around here start giving way and the scar tissue gives and it leaks and whatever, at some point, this valve is going to float away. Not necessarily away, but it's going to float. So valve float is something that they look at doing these tests that they just did on me. And they said there's no float yet, but obviously as all this area around the perimeter gives loose, eventually that valve will float. So think about how bad the shortage of breath is for just these two little sections. If suddenly half of it gave way and floated up, I wouldn't be able to function. As I was wrapping up the day on bed rest after the heart catheterization, the general cardiologist came in. I like this guy. He's worked on engines, so he's able to explain things in a way that makes sense to me. And we talked about this float issue and the tissue around it and everything else. And what he said is that the interventional doctor thinks that he might be able to patch these two leaks. And I asked, well, how would you do that? And he explained the use of for lack of a better word, a double-headed umbrella. If you think back a few years ago when I had the PFO hole open up on the upper septum of my heart, and they had to use a closure device, that device kind of looks like a double-headed umbrella. And let's say this was the PFO hole in my septum originally. What they do is they stick it through there and then they pull it back so it opens the umbrella, right? And then you end up with these two umbrellas and you seal it off here and those seal that hole. And I said, okay, I remember that from the PFO closure, familiar with the device. What I don't understand is these have to be round. So let's say here you put a round device in there to seal that arc. Fine, it's on the ring. But if this hole is this big, it's going to take a PFO device, something like this, to cover the arc seal. And isn't that going to impact the ability of the valve to do its job? And that's obviously one of the things they need to check out. So that's what the cardiologist and the interventional guy are looking at to see, could they use these PFO closure devices to seal the two leaks I have now? The bigger concern I had that I asked him about is, okay, if this is all the same basic scar tissue now, and we already have these two big leaks happening at 2 years, then logic would tell me that in another year, I'm gonna have another big leak up here or over here eventually, whatever. And so it becomes kind of I'll use this analogy because my last name is Dutch, but it's sort of like playing the little Dutch boy. You've got your dike, you've got a bunch of holes popping up that are leaking, and as they leak, you're trying to put your finger in them, but you only got so many fingers, and maybe we gave the Dutch boy a roll of duct tape this time to make it a little better, but eventually failure is imminent. And so all we're doing with these closure devices is we're not fixing the general problem, it's still failing. We're just trying to buy more time and more quality of life of hopefully being able to keep them fixed so that I can still breathe reasonable enough to at least be as active as I am today. Knowing how bad the shortness of breath has been getting, I was kind of hoping that maybe within a week or so I'd hear something from the doctors about wanting me to come in and get the PFO closure devices to try that. I haven't heard anything. It's been a couple weeks and I can't just sit around waiting and worrying. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to take Barron and we're going to road trip out this coming Wednesday. And we're going to go to the Kentucky Derby and we're going to have fun with my old college buddies, some of the degenerates from Iowa State and the Tassels days, and try something new and have fun. At this point, I would expect that I won't hear anything until the end of May when I have the follow-up appointments. Another learning I had about that same time, shortly before this last day of hospital test, and it was a big one actually, it wasn't that one doctor had reminded me that, hey, even if we could fix this valve, you are at risk of sudden death any day with this heart now. I already kind of knew that, so I'd already sort of processed that information. It wasn't necessarily that. I just found myself in a really dark place one day. And I realized that despite, I think, kind of skipping right through the emotional component or event of the mortality acceptance, because I've been sort of accepting this since I was 34 and had the first surgery, that's not that big of a deal. What was sort of starting to build up on me was the constant dealing with it. It was not just hear the news from the doctor and move on, it's then having to answer everybody's well-intended questions and unsolicited guidance or help. It's the dealing constantly with doctor appointments and insurance information and trying to plan the financial future and figure that out and tax implications. And it becomes really sort of all consuming. And you're also trying to, at the same time, get the house cleaned out and make sure the will's in place. And what other legal things in that do I have to make sure are established so that everything is as easy for my family as possible when I do go. And at some point with all that, one day I just boom, hit a brick wall with it. So the next day I decided I was going to start a new policy. I will continue to do these YouTube videos. They're helpful in several ways. For me personally, I'm able to organize my thoughts enough, draw things out as I need, put the thoughts together and make sure that I understand what's happening objectively. And I can convey that in a message. Again, that helps me understand better. The message I'm conveying also helps other people that may be going through similar so that they can better understand it in terms of the patient perspective that I'm trying to provide. And it also allows a mechanism for family and friends, if they want to see that level of detail, they're able to watch those videos. Beyond that, I am done talking about it. It is stupid of me to have what could be the last conversation with somebody and have it be dark and depressing about this health issue. More selfishly, why would I want to spend any more of my limited, precious time talking about something unhappy? If I'm focused on dying, I can't focus on living. And yes, I do have to still keep up with whatever doctor appointments are there and paperwork and the financials and all that other stuff. That's got to be done. But beyond that, this is the time to just put aside whatever BS, drama, annoyance, anything that really doesn't matter, and just tune it out. I don't need it. Every day from this point forward could literally be my last. And so I want to be as happy as I can for every one of those days. Not just for myself, but for everybody I encounter, whether it's a phone call to an old friend or family member, or whether it's somebody on the street or at the gym that I don't even know. It makes me a better person for both me and for them. And that kind of mentality is what's going to help me be the happiest version of myself possible for the time remaining. So I can focus on exercise in the gym, the dog, friends, playing with the cars, riding the motorcycles, wrenching on them, playing guitar, my YouTubes, trying new things like acro yoga or my vocal course I'm taking or going to the Kentucky Derby. Basically, whatever I want. And nothing else matters. I know that people feel like they have to say something, they can't say nothing, but there's just no need. It's not productive. They don't need to feel obligated to do that. I have a path I'm working with the doctors, and some tip from Reader's Digest about shaking chicken bones in the Yahtzee cup isn't gonna magically heal me. A news article on a horse testicle being implanted on a squirrel in Sweden has nothing to do with my health situation. Unless somebody from a medical profession on my team tells me something otherwise, I am currently at risk of sudden death with this heart every day, and that's not going to change. I'm on the exit ramp of life, and that's okay. There's no need to feel sad or sorry or angry or anything else. It's just the facts. I had a genetic issue to start with. I didn't take good care of myself, so because of my poor choices, this is the situation I'm in, and I take full responsibility for that. But how or when we die doesn't matter. It's how we live that means everything. If you want to pray, feel free. I won't tell you what you should or shouldn't believe, and I expect the same courtesy back from you. But maybe instead of praying for a miracle for me that just isn't going to happen, maybe pray for my family and friends so that instead of dwelling on tragedy, they can celebrate in the victory and see what I see, which is a lifetime filled with these awesome experiences enjoyed to the hilt every single day with no limits and no regrets. Instead of the darkness of the storm, maybe we can all just focus on the resulting beauty of a life fully lived and genuinely appreciated. Don't worry, it's all just a symptom of being human. If you haven't done so, please click the link below to subscribe. Click the little bell for notifications. Check out the YCC merch store and see if there's anything you like. Let's live for today.